Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the Amazon Workspaces Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery Best Practices presentation. My name is Phil Person, and I'm the Senior Specialist Solution Architect here at AWS in the end user computing space. So today we're going to take a look at a 300 level deep dive, and I hope you've had a chance to watch Larry and Manir's presentations about what is Amazon Workspaces and why you would use Amazon Workspaces. So in this session today, we're going to take a look at why customers choose to use Amazon Workspaces for disaster recovery and business continuity. We're going to take a look at some of the out-of-the-box architecture, along with some additional infrastructure considerations for you to increase the resiliency of your Amazon Workspaces solution, along with the user working environment. And then we'll take a look at some new features, some multi-region deployment capabilities, and then we'll take a look at a wrap-up as well. So what is the Amazon Workspaces desktop as a service solution? It's a fully virtualized desktop as a service offering from Amazon. It's fully manageable at cloud scale with high reliability and high security along with control. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was why some customers choose to use Amazon Workspaces for disaster recovery and business continuity. So we see customers accessing their desktop from anywhere on any device through things like natural disasters. So we've got some customers far north Queensland in Australia where we've had some tropical cyclones rip through their towns and cities where their staff have been unable to leave their homes and go to work. So we've actually seen some customers stand up Amazon Workspaces to allow their staff to work remotely from home. The second is human-induced disasters, and probably don't need to tell you much about the current scenario that we're all in working remotely. As part of Amazon's global business continuity plans, many of the Amazon staff, many of the Amazon internal staff have actually been working at home, and I personally have been exclusively using my Amazon Workspace corporate desktop as part of my remote working capabilities. Amazon Workspaces can scale as fast as you need it to. Just a bit of a caveat there, just around your AWS account limits, but we really can scale as you need us to. Please talk to your account team to ensure that your account limits are appropriately sized for your particular requirements. And you only pay for what you use with Amazon Workspaces, so you can pay by the hour, which is really interesting for a lot of customers, specifically in a DR and BCP scenario. But you can also pay a fixed monthly price. So I wanted to take a look at the actual workspace architecture under the hood to kind of show you what's actually there. And this is just a standard deployment pattern. Everything but the far left-hand side is just part of the standard solution. There's no additional cost for any of this. This is just part of what we deploy when you deploy workspaces. So on the far left-hand side at the bottom, we would normally have traditional data center, so the customer data center. So this would be where your traditional infrastructure would reside, your Active Directory domain controllers, Radius servers, DNS, and any file shares or any supporting infrastructure for your users' desktops. Above that, we have your users, so they could be working remotely, that could be at your office, anywhere on any device. So we have Workspaces clients available for Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and Chromebooks. Anything down to a 10-inch screen we support. So those users could be anywhere on any one of those devices. As long as they have a public internet connection, we're good to go. On the right-hand side, we have the AWS cloud, and we're deploying workspaces into a particular region. So I hope this is obviously a 300 technical deep dive session. So I hope you're all familiar with some of the AWS vernacular, such as AWS regions, availability zones, and VPCs. So on the right-hand side, we have the AWS region. So you would pick a region to deploy your infrastructure into. We also have 3 managed VPCs, which you can see the top 2 and then the far right. So those managed VPCs are managed, owned and operated by Amazon as part of our desktop as a service solution. And we're placing network infrastructure into your VPC and your subnets, which is that bottom left-hand side on the customer side of that. So the first thing the user would actually go off and do is type in the registration code for the Workspaces client. That registration code points the user and the client at the specific region to connect to, along with a unique identifier for your directory to authenticate against. Once the user's typed in those three sets of credentials, they're passed through to the authentication and streaming services, so that the transmission occurs on HTTPS. It's obviously all encrypted with TLS 1.2. So those authentication session gateways pass that through to a directory service of some description. There's three choices for you to choose from with your directory service, either the simple AD, the AWS managed Active Directory, or an AD connector. So I've actually got an AD connector pictured here in this architecture slide, where we're relaying the user authentication request through to an on-premise Active Directory using your VPC and your subnets through a direct connect to enable network connectivity. The second thing that needs to happen is once the user's authenticated, the streaming session occurs. So we obviously, again, that the streaming gateways are publicly available, and the network traffic is either TCP and UDP 4172 or TCP and UDP 4195 if you're using the new Workspaces streaming protocol. The Amazon Workspace instance resides in a particular availability zone. It has two EBS volumes attached to that particular instance, the C drive and the D drive for Windows, or if you're in Linux, the root and the user volumes. So we take regular 12-hour snapshots of those EBS volumes, which enable you to do some very interesting things with restore and recovery, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. But what we do is we place that network adapter again into your VPC and your subnets, and from there it's able to access your on-premise resources back on-premise through the Direct Connect, or if you're using other VPCs or your other AWS resources. So here is the complete architecture slide, and this is something that you probably see floating around in our documentation. So let's go a next layer deeper. What it actually is behind the Amazon Workspaces solution? So I spoke about it being highly resilient service. We're actually deploying a lot of the infrastructure into two of the availability zones in each region. So if we take a look at the authentication specifically, we're deploying our authentication and gateway services into multiple availability zones. There's multiple instances deployed for your directory service as well. And then the actual workspace instances are also placed into multiple availability zones. The one thing we can't do is actually place the specific workspace instance into more than one availability zone. So the user Phil has a workspace and that's deployed into a single availability zone. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in the event of a recovery shortly. And here is the complete slide again with all of the different components. So some additional infrastructure considerations to think of, and we're just talking about a single region deployment at this stage. Some additional considerations you need to think about. Any additional, if you have network connectivity back to on-premise, think about the network pathing to connect AWS to your on-premise environment. So things like if you're running a direct connect, have multiple AWS direct connect services to multiple different AWS points of presence, and that will enable you to fail over by using BGP between those different direct connect services if you need to. At the very least, have an IPsec VPN failover. Again, it can all happen through BGP routing, but have that VPN solution as the ultimate fallback should something go wrong with your direct connect service. So have a think about the supporting infrastructure as well. So things like your Active Directory domain controllers. DNS is key for Active Directory and user authentication. If for some reason a DNS server were to fail and it's only in one availability zone, or it's only in one server on premise, that will mean that your users will not be able to authenticate and log into their desktop. So have multiple copies of these replicated, perhaps across different availability zones, or on a mixture of on-premise and in AWS. Also have a think about any additional services that your users require to access their desktop and do their job. So things like file shares, perhaps a mail server, perhaps a database server, some application server. Have multiple copies of these across multiple availability zones, or spread the risk between AWS and on-premise as well. But first and foremost, follow the AWS well-architected framework in all of your designs and decisions, because that will ensure that you're appropriately architected for and resilient for failures. So just a quick discussion just around the EBS volumes. So I mentioned that for each workspace there are two EBS volumes at play, and we take those regular 12-hour snapshots of those volumes. So you have a couple of options here. You can perform a restore if the user's done something silly inside of their workspace. They've installed something that's broken the registry, broken the network. You can actually perform a restore of that workspace. What that does is it rolls back the two EBS volumes, the C drive and the D drive, back to that last known good snapshot that can be up to 12 hours old. In the event AWS has some kind of availability zone impacting issue where you need to actually relaunch the workspace, you can perform a rebuild of that workspace. And what that actually does is creates a brand new instance. It has logic to pick the healthy availability zone as part of its launch logic. And it brings the C drive back from the image, the original image that was used to launch the workspace, and the D drive or the user volume back from that last known good snapshot. You can additionally extend on this deployment pattern by leveraging things like roaming profiles or profile synchronization solutions. Things like the out-of-the-box Windows Active Directory profile synchronization or roaming profile solutions. You can also use additional third-party profile synchronization solutions, which is really nice to help you migrate into Workspaces as an example from an on-premise environment, but also very handy for replicating user profiles between AWS regions or between availability zones. In addition to that, you can synchronize your files, perhaps have a file share on EC2, and then have ADFS clusters to replicate between the different availability zones. Or if you're looking for a managed file sharing solution, take a look at Amazon FSx as well. In addition to that, we've seen a lot of customers leverage file sharing and collaboration platforms. So a really cool example of this is the Amazon WorkDocs solution, where you can actually mount a local drive with WorkDocs Drive, and it maps the drive into your PC, and from there you're able to drag and drop files, save files, and it synchronizes those files back to the Amazon cloud, which is super cool. It also lets you access all of your files from anywhere on any device. So I could, inside my corporate workspace, use the Amazon WorkDocs solution to save my documents. And then when I'm on the road, I can actually use my phone, my mobile phone, and connect using the Amazon WorkDocs client for iPhones as an example. So we've previously spoken about a single region deployment. But what if you wanted to extend on that, reduce your risk, and have a multi-region deployment for Amazon Workspaces? So we've got many customers that have deployed a multi-region solution with Amazon Workspaces, but basically you have a few options. A pilot-like deployment is what we're going to look at now. And this would be where you're deploying your infrastructure in a specific region or a specific failover region, but it's just the supporting infrastructure to support your desktop workload. So things like your Active Directory domain controllers, DNS servers, file shares, patch deployments, servers, all of those ancillary services that support your desktops, you're going to deploy into your pilot-like region. And from there, you can launch your workspaces when you need to. So if everything's ready to go, you kind of just have a button to push if you have to perform a DR failover to the alternate region. So you'd push that button and it would then launch your workspace desktop solution from there. The one thing you just need to be aware of is we do have API rate limiting, just depending on how many workspaces you're deploying and how fast you're deploying those. So if you're putting any custom tooling together around around your workspace launch capability, make sure you're using the Amazon SDKs and the AWS SDKs to build your tooling and your solutions. And that has something called exponential backoff algorithms baked into those. And I've got a few links to those, to some good information at the end of this slide pack. But that can help pause that rate limiting. If we start to see throttling, it can do a throttling back, and it can resubmit and retry those same requests. Also, keep in mind that the launch of the workspace is actually really fast, and the API requests to launch your workspace are really fast. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a working solution, a working workspace in minutes. You need to have a think about how long does it take to join a machine to your Active Directory, apply your group policies, download the latest Windows updates and patches. Perhaps to have a think about what the delta is between the original image that you're launching your desktops from and the updates that need to go on inside of that desktop. Also, if you're deploying applications down to your desktops through patching and deployment applications, make sure that you understand how long it takes for those applications to get pushed down. Also spoke really quickly about images. So if perhaps you're only updating an image once every year or once every 6 months, just keep in mind that you need to factor in the time of a new launch for a workspace to go off and patch and update itself from that base image. So you might want to have a think about reducing that time that it will take to get that workspace up and running by more frequently updating the image that it's launching from. But have a think about the balance and cost. So a pilot-like solution is a good balance between risk and cost. You're deploying just the infrastructure needed to support your desktops, but you're not deploying all of the desktops at the same time. So you can think about a hot standby solution where we're building on that pilot-like scenario where you have already deployed all of this supporting infrastructure, but you're going ahead to actually pre-launch a lot of your workspaces fleet. You could pre-launch your workspaces in auto stop mode, meaning you're paying for the consumption of that workspace by the hour with a small residual cost per user per month just for the storage. Just make sure if you're pre-deploying your workspaces fleet in auto stop mode, perhaps the user's not going to log in to that desktop for some months, even years. So just have a think about regularly starting those workspace instances to make sure that they're regularly patched and maintained. Also worth noting, if out of the box you've just left your workspaces fleet as auto stop, we do actually have something called a maintenance mode, where Amazon will go ahead and start those instances each and every month to give you that level of assurance that they are patched and updated. For the end user to flip between the different regions, they can just change the registration code in the Workspaces client. Worth noting that the new version 3 Workspaces client gives your users the capability to put in a custom friendly display name for your registration code, which an easy thing for them to then remember to go and change that. And this solution gives you a rapid disaster recovery solution in minutes. All your users are going off and doing is changing that registration code. They're connecting to that workspace. That workspace just needs to come out of hibernation mode, which can take normally about 90 seconds for it to come out of that hibernation state. So it's rapid DR in minutes. Obviously, it does have the flip side of it. It can be quite expensive, right? So you're reducing your risk, but having an expensive solution pre-deployed, waiting for your users to connect. So another option is we actually see customers deploying a hybrid solution of that original pilot-like deployment and then the hot standby for select critical groups of users. So perhaps your senior executives, where it is mission critical for them to have a desktop available within a few minutes notice. But for perhaps other groups of users within your organization, it's not so critical. So perhaps you could then have that other group of users deployed as that pilot light, where you can push the button and have the workspace deployed after that. So here's a good segue just to talk about a new feature that was released for the Amazon Workspaces offering, something called cross-region redirection capability. So this works with your domain name service. So rather than having a prefixed registration code with a bunch of unique characters inside of it, you're actually using a domain name. And I'll be showing that as part of my demo in a little bit. But your users would type in the domain name and a record at .domainname.com for their registration code, and it then uses DNS to pick up the rest of the registration code that the Workspaces client will need to connect to the region and your workspace. So in the example in the demo, I'm actually going to show the Route 53, the Amazon Route 53 service, and I'll show you how it can use multiple records, multiple failover records to connect to your desktop. And what we're doing to actually switch those records is using the Amazon CloudWatch service and CloudWatch alarms specifically to flip those records across. So this is a good segue to that demo. So for this demo, I'm going to show you the new cross-region redirection capability in the Workspaces client. So I've obviously installed the client. As the registration code, I'm using a domain name, and I'll show you what that looks like in Route 53 shortly. So I've launched this workspace against my company Active Directory, and I'll go ahead and log in with my corporate credentials. So once we're logged in, you'll be able to see some interesting information. So you'll obviously be able to see my private network inside my VPC and subnets, but you'll also be able to see the particular region and availability zone that this workspace instance has been deployed into. So AP Southeast 2 is the Sydney region. The other thing I wanted to quickly show you is the WorkDocs Drive solution. So that's our file sharing collaboration service where we're able to synchronize files between multiple devices on the Amazon cloud. So I'll just create a bit of a demo file here for you, just so you can see the synchronization at play. All right, so the other thing I wanted to quickly show you is to break this particular workspace. And the reason I want it to break is I want to show you that I can connect using that same registration code, connect to a different workspace in a different region. So we've got two network adapters here. The filmmad.com.au is my private elastic network interface in my VPC, but this particular network adapter is the management plane card. And by disabling it, I'll stop firstly the streaming activity into the workspace between the Workspaces clients, so you'll see that break. And you'll also break all of the health checks and management control plane as well. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close that. So behind the scenes, while waiting for the records to fail over, behind the scenes what we're doing is I've created a hosted zone with a bunch of records. So obviously the hosted zone fieldperson.com with two text records. And these are particular failover records, primary being my Sydney site and the secondary failover record being the Singapore site. So I'll just bring up a quick command prompt and just do an NS lookup just to see what the actual record is set to. So it's currently set to Sydney. So what we want this to happen, what we want to happen is have this fail over to the Singapore region. So how that actually happens is using these health checks. So I've created a Route 53 health check. You can obviously see I've been experimenting and playing with my lab over the course of the last day. But what we want this to do is actually flick into an unhealthy state. And what that'll do is it'll force the Route 53 DNS records to flip into that secondary Singapore region. So the last thing I wanted to quickly show you is inside the Workspaces management console. So in here, you'll be able to see I've configured a domain name and I've also linked this particular domain name with a directory or associated it with a directory. So that creates the linkage behind the scenes for me to connect to multiple regions. So let's have a look and just wait while this fails over. All right, so as you can see, this health check is now flagged as unhealthy. So it'll flag with my Route 53 zone and DNS records that it's ready for a failover. So if we now take a look at my DNS records, you can see that DNS record has now flipped over to the Singapore region. So this is super cool. So let's log back into my workspace now. I've connected these multiple regions and deployed multiple regions to the same backend Active Directory. So I spoke about before having your domain controllers across multiple regions. So this is a great example of where you'll be able to leverage this solution. So I'm logging back into my corporate workspace now using the same credentials that I used before. So I'm the same user from an identity perspective. But you'll be able to see my private IP address is firstly different, 10.10.11.93. So this is my Singapore VPC, Singapore subnets. And you'll also, interestingly enough, see that my region and availability zone is quite different as well. So AP Southeast 1 being the Singapore region. So this is actually a different instance in a different region using and I connected using that domain name, which is super cool. So I've also created and installed the WorkDocs Drive solution on this instance as well. And inside of this, it's now connecting to the WorkDocs cloud, and it's been able to retrieve my documents with my content. So I mentioned a few key resources and some next steps for you here. So the first link is the Amazon Workspaces business continuity page, along with a blog post which I actually wrote late last year around business continuity and disaster recovery with Amazon Workspaces. It covers some of this content that I presented today, but in a little bit more depth. So it's definitely worth taking a look at that. The next link that I've got here is a link to one of my colleagues' blog posts about setting up that hot standby multi-region deployment. So he's got some really nice code snippets for you to go off and use and start deploying across multiple regions. Also spoke about the well-architected framework from Amazon, so it's definitely one to take a look and baseline your infrastructure. Please reach out to the account team if you need any assistance for that. Also mentioned the APIs and API rate limiting. Definitely worth it if you're looking to programmatically launch your Amazon Workspaces solution at scale and rapidly. Definitely worth taking a look at these two documentation artifacts just around the use of the AWS SDKs and the theory behind the exponential backoff. So just a quick wrap up with some key takeaways. I hope you've all learnt something as part of this session. But as I was reflecting on things that I hope that I was impressing upon you today, is just the out of the box architecture. Well, multi-availability zone by design. So if you need additional reassurance around your SLAs for the Amazon Workspaces service, take a look at a multi-region deployment, some ideas about the user working environments, some file collaboration and solutions, file collaboration and synchronization suggestions, multi-region deployment, which can help you achieve a greater RTO. And please reach out to your AWS account team. We're here to help in both understanding your business requirements and then making sure that we collectively, but both AWS and you as the customer, are well architected to suit your business requirements. And for that, thank you very much. I think we're pretty much at time. So I believe we are looking for feedback on all sessions. So please fill out the survey post this session. Really keen to hear your feedback and thoughts so we can make this better for future sessions. So thank you very much.